let you get recording. Good? Well, welcome back to, I'm Carrie Toth again, and there's my contact information again in case you haven't seen me before. We're going to talk about understanding by design and that idea of beginning with the end in mind and just planning to get that great harvest at the end of your language program, however long it is. Some of you I've talked to have languages starting in elementary school, and then others are like my district where they're just a 4-year program. But wherever you are, hopefully we'll be able to meet you somewhere along the path. I don't want you to think that this has to be for CI only. If you're in an environment where you have to use a textbook, all of these things still apply. Because understanding by design just means planning for what's the most important and what are the things that are going to be the most engaging, and give your students the tools they need to become these future learners and cultural lovers. What I'm going to be talking to you about, though, is going to require some kind of out-of-the-box thinking for some. And so what I want you to remember is that it's a slow process. And if you've never planned backward before, or if you've never designed units that weren't based around a text before, or if you've never even heard of understanding by design before, it's not something you want to do this summer and plan 30 units for each of your 4 levels of Spanish that you have to teach in the fall. You'll burn yourself out really fast. Come in slowly. It took me a long time to make this change, and I still, every year I go back and I think, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this a little differently. So first I want to show you a study. Here's our data to back up the fact that we don't have good harvests in the United States of language learners. Now remember what I told you. I was coming out with about 2 to 4 level 4 students, and that would be somewhere around 2 to 3% of the kids that started in, or 5% sometimes, of the kids that started in level 1 Spanish. And who's left at the end of those 4 years? At the end of those 4 years, it's only the best of the best that are left. So the Centers for Advanced Language Research do some studies, and this is from CASLS, C-A-S-L-S, one of the Centers for Advanced Language Research, and look at what they found. Reading scores in level 4, so year 4 is Spanish 4, or the 4th year of study. Level 4 is intermediate low. So a level 1 student is isolated to words. A level 2 student would be novice mid. They get chunks of language that they can identify. A level 3 can identify like whole sentences. Level 4 is starting to be able to read some paragraphs. But look at this. 22.6% of students after 4 years of language study are only ended up reading like short paragraphs. 32% of them are still reading at the sentence level. And these are the best of the best kids. This is a study broadly over the United States. Writing levels, 36%, 42%. We're falling as a nation in the novice high, intermediate low range after 4 years. And that isn't good enough. They're not able to converse and use their language successfully. And speaking, even a little worse, 32% are only novice highs. They can only produce sentence-long utterances. They can't have a conversation. And 24% are intermediate low. So if you hear people refer to the studies that show that our language students are graduating around that novice high level, it's the truth. And so that's why they're not staying in. That's why they have bad attitudes when they go on to be our legislators. How I used to plan was, well, it's day 1 of class, and I'm on page 1 of the textbook. And tomorrow is day 2, so I'll be on day 2 of the textbook. And after we get done with that unit, you remember Paso a Paso, Realidades, I'm sure every book does it. The introductory unit has calendar, days of the week, all the school commands, all the things that are in your classroom, numbers from 1 to a billion. And this is what we teach them in 2 weeks of study. It's no wonder they come in the first day and they're all bright-eyed like, we're going to learn Spanish. And then about the 3rd day when you're like, okay, open your books to page 5. Let's learn all the months of the year. They get bored. My planning was terrible. The national board told me so. They said, you are a fool. You don't know how to plan anything. So my planning was strictly based on an order out of a textbook, and I never questioned it because that's just how we did it. They sell them and they market them as Spanish textbooks. Can you see it? Something was not right in the herd. What changed was that my students weren't staying in and my students weren't acquiring language. And when I had those no inglés days, they were terrified. And that's not what I wanted. What I wanted was for them to feel comfortable and confident using this language. So I decided that I needed to get some good training. I found a couple of mentors online, but those mentors online led me to people like Susan Gross and Carol Gobb and Blaine Ray and Ben Slavic, who taught me a lot of things about providing comprehensible input to my students. About that time, I was doing my master's program, and I happened to fall into this class called Understanding by Design. Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe wrote the book. There's a workbook. You don't even have to buy it. There's a ton of worksheets online where you can go out and get it. But that's what we're going to talk about today. What does a unit look like when it's been backward designed? And what it really means is that starting with the end in mind. What am I going to assess them on? I used to teach a whole chapter and then go to the tests as a matter of fact, that National Board entry on designing instruction over time, the test I gave them as their big assessment at the end was the Chapter 2 tests from Realidades 2. And that's what I sent in as an example of how I was testing my students. No wonder I didn't pass. I needed a come to Jesus moment, and they gave it to me, and things are all good now. Getting better, always. So I just taught whatever it said in the book. And then at the end, I gave them the test. I recorded the results. I didn't look at those results to see if I needed to reteach anything because, by gosh, if I'm going to get to Chapter 7B of Realidades by the end of Level 1, I don't have time to go back and teach you Chapter 6A again. So Understanding by Design came to the rescue. How does your unit flow? I planned from the beginning. Like, okay, we're going to start on page 1. We're going to do the vocabulary. You do all your vocabulary and all the activities and all the workbook pages. Then what comes next in a chapter in a textbook? Grammar. Then we're going to do all the grammar, separate from the vocabulary, all the grammar, all the little fill in the blanks. And then we're going to do the culture. What's the culture in a textbook? A reading passage at the end of the chapter or a tiny bubble. And then you get to the end and you see the big vocab list. And what it has is a billion nouns, like 20 verbs, not in their conjugated form, so not usable chunks. And in the bottom corner, there's useful to know. And these are the words that take students from novice to intermediate proficiency. Then, while, during, like important words to become a more proficient speaker, to move up that level. I just was like, we got all these clothing items to learn. I cannot worry about además right now. That word, there's nothing. And that was the biggest mistake ever. So backward planning means instead of teaching a unit and writing a test, we're actually going to plan the assessment first and then figure out what we need to teach that unit. Whoa, I had never done it before. In this class, in my master's class, was the first time I had started planning with the end in mind on the big picture, like what things do I want to bring in high-frequency words in my classroom. But I had never started planning just my individual units like that because I'd always just done it straight from the text. Actful has put out a really great book called The Keys to Planning for Learning. It's basically Understanding by Design, written for language teachers. And so they also have an app. If you have an iPad and you go into the app store and you look for Actful Planning, it looks like that. And it's got templates, so you can just type straight into it, and it keeps a library of all your backward planned lessons that you use. The book or the app, they're a great way to plan these really tight units that take what's the assessment, what do I expect of them, And how am I going to give them all the keys they need to be successful? Because I wasn't really. At the end of those realidades units, you'd have your nouns and your verbs all separate. And then at the end, it would say, write a letter to a friend in which you blah, blah, blah. Well, we had never combined the nouns and verbs. They were all separate in our class. So I wasn't preparing them for what that final assessment was. So our first stage, as we're learning to backward plan, how do you decide what are worthwhile goals for your students? If you look at the book, Understanding by Design, that's how you narrow the field. You've got a textbook at your school that you have to use. Okay. What are worthwhile goals with your students from inside that textbook? I started really looking at my book then. Think about that chores unit. Everybody's textbook has it. But how many of you, when you say what chores do you do at home, everybody's like making their list like the farm kid, you know, oh, I got to milk the cows. Nobody. You tell them, what chores do you do? My mom makes my bed. My mom cleans my room. My mom does the laundry. And so that's not an engaging unit, and it's not a worthwhile goal. And I started really getting introspective about this. Wait a minute. Knowing the clothes isn't really a worthwhile goal either. And knowing, oh my gosh, knowing like hiking vocabulary, that's not a worthwhile goal. Wait a minute. And I realized that the worthwhile goals were things that weren't in the textbook at all. Like, there are a lot of reasons why Spanish speakers might be coming to the United States, and it's not what their parents say at home to take your jobs. Those are the worthwhile goals now for me. I have units of study that give them all the vocabulary they need, but the main goals, the identified results, I want them to come out decent human beings that understand that there are different perspectives. I want them to come out thinking, this language is like a magical thing that we can speak together and nobody else understands us. When the principal comes in and we're speaking Spanish and we're like, Senor Bulls, because he'll act, but he has no idea what they're talking about, they think that's hilarious. Last year he came in, we were having, Senor Woolley has this video, El Banco, and we were Spanish too. We were really getting into El Banco, and so we had a bank robbery literally happening in the classroom at the time. Everyone's on the ground on their stomach, and the bank robbers are standing at the front, and one of them is crying because he's scared and he wants his mommy, and the principal walked in the back door of my classroom just as he picked up the phone to call his mom, and the kids are all like, Senora, whatever the kid's last name was, and he said, see? Oh, so great. So then we get to talk about it and tell him stuff, and he gets his confused look, and I think he understands some. But those are the worthwhile goals, to let them see that this language is like a code for them, that they're really using it. So we're going to think of worthwhile goals inside of the context of our texts, but also let's think of big overarching goals that we can spread throughout our classroom and throughout our 4 years, because that's part of that harvest. Until they connect, in my master's research, I learned about the connection between language and culture. And if you study cultures but you don't know their languages, it's like a piece of that is missing. You're not connecting completely with the culture. But the same is true. I was presenting culture as this reading at the end of the chapter. And so the kids were never connecting with the language because they didn't really know anything about the people who spoke it. And so we're digging deeper these days. What are your enduring understandings? This was a huge fail of mine. I thought I wanted their enduring understanding to be, oh, as, amos, ais, an, and leave my room knowing how to conjugate verbs. But that doesn't matter. We have this little teeny space. They have 1 billion phone numbers and song lyrics and codes to video games floating around in their head, and our Spanish spot is so small that if they leave my room only knowing the endings to verbs, then I'm not giving them a love for languages and cultures. So I'm going to teach them chunks. I'm going to, help them find the patterns in the verbs, but that's not necessarily what I want to endure. What I want to endure is that they can go out and use this language to get something they want, need, tell somebody what they have. And another thing about the classroom before was that I didn't have any room for my passions to fit in there. Like, there were all kinds of things I loved and wanted to do, but you get bogged down in what's in... Wait a minute. Class A. This is my backpack. My mochila. What's inside your backpack? Wait a minute. This is good stuff. I travel with this backpack. Heaven knows what's in here. Oh, marcadores. See how interesting this is, class? I have un libro in my backpack. Oh, wait. Un calcetín. It's not fun for them to go through their backpack. And honestly, I have never once in any of my travels been asked to open that, thank heaven, because as you see, that sock is representative of the state of the inside of my backpack. So those are the things, I know that we talked at lunch, you're tied by a textbook. But on the overarching final, if you pulled out one unit like that with the backpack stuff, could you then stick in a unit that you're passionate about? So if you're having to work within the confines of what your department says is what you have to do, or if you're just getting started, if you've been in the textbook or if you've been, using other people's units and you really want to get in and do this yourself, it's overwhelming to think that you need 36 weeks worth of new material before you start next year. It doesn't have to be. One thing that you'll notice is that as you transition, you can use the same unit across 4 levels, just with a little bit different kind of discussion, a little bit more elaborate detail as they get older. And get something that you're passionate about, because that's the number one way to get that win-win, where it's engaging for them and engaging for you too. So we're going to do reply with woohoo. Are you passionate about? We need a good, enthusiastic, hearty woohoo. If you're passionate about it, it's not going to be culture. Woohoo! We are. You know what I've found? The kids aren't yet. So we have to figure out tricky little ways, and I'm going to show you how I've been trying to trick them into getting more passionate about cultures. Mine are very, and you guys are in Iowa, I'm in southern Illinois. It's a similar demographic, very much like white rural farm kids that I'm dealing with most of the time. And so when I talk about world cultures, they're like, okay, film! Woohoo! And they are passionate about film. I use film, and guys, sometimes I use films that have subtitles in English on them. And sometimes I use films that are completely in English, like Selena. But why am I using it? The culture and the discussion that we have afterward is my actual goal. Like, I'm teaching for the end. I want them to be able to understand, what things look like. La Misma Luna. It's a great immigration film. I want them to see why people come to the United States. It's, there's a broad variety of reasons. I show that film with the subtitles on. If I didn't, my Spanish ones would not understand anything, and I've wasted an opportunity to share a beautiful film with them. But then we can talk about it, and we can talk about the family and how close were the family. And would your mom work in another place? Does your mom work outside the home? All kinds of little level 1, late level 1 kind of discussion that we can have in Spanish now about this common cultural experience that we've had. Music! Woo! They love the music. We listen to music. This new school, they had never listened to music before. And my kids, I was spoiled because my kids at the old school, they just kind of knew a lot of songs. But, it was so fun to watch them the first time that they had a song, and they were all tweeting about, we heard this song in Spanish today, and getting it on their little, on their music streaming things. And they're so cute. Dancing. Oh, that was a little less. Not as many. I'm not embarrassed to dance in front of them. We do these little Zumba videos as brain breaks. We call it Friday 5-minute rave. And when they come in, we'll have the desks all spread out of the center, and we'll dance this little Zumba video and then get started. Reading. Woo! We do lots of that in Spanish class, and I try to make sure that I encompass some of the things that they're passionate about and that's why I ended up writing novels, just because there were things I was passionate about and wanted to teach that I needed a novel to be able to share with my class. Nature. Less. I'm fascinated by nature, but I don't actually like to go in it very well. I love to see, I love all the animals and stuff out in the jungles in Panama, but when I get out there and there's mosquitoes all over me, I'm like, I'll just go back to watching the videos. History. And that's a great topic for language class. Think about the ways you can engage your students by bringing in historical things, and you're connecting then. Let's say you have to do clothing as part of your unit. What kind of historical things? Well, you can look at, there's some great videos on YouTube of clothing styles over the last 100 years. And you can find them from different countries. Beauty over the last 100 years from a lot of different countries. So share one of those videos and use that clothing vocabulary, but use it in a historical kind of setting. And then all of a sudden your history buffs have something to be excited about. Science. Oh, yeah, there's not many of us. Usually I think your science brain and your language brain are separate brains, but I went to school intending to become a doctor, and, you know, Spanish is one of those things. I told you Kayla was going to be a doctor, too, but once you get to studying Spanish, it sucks you in. So I'm a biology minor, and I love to do sciencey stuff. We do experiments and things in the classroom because that's one of my passions, and they like it, too. How about travel? Yeah, I think that's kind of a requirement. Our students don't know yet. So you guys, I've been brainwashing them this year. Well, first semester, I had a Spanish 1 class all year this year. First semester, I wanted to make sure they knew the days of the week and the months of the year, but I didn't want to, like, teach that, take time out to teach it. So I put memes as the background of my smartboard every day. So every Monday it was a lunes meme, and every Tuesday it was a martes meme, and they got all the days of the week because, you know, the weekend ones would have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, like they have people diving off into the weekend. They got their months of the year. And then second semester I focused on travel, and I put up all kinds of little travel memes all second semester just to make them subliminally, like, someday be like, I can't stand it. I got to go somewhere. I don't know why. What's happening to me? I feel the urge to leave. Okay. If you remember nothing else, here's the key to backward design. Over here on the left, this is the graphic that Wiggins and McTighe put into the Understanding by Design book. So what you see is the yellow is the enduring understandings. That's literally about how much space you're going to get in a student's brain to go with them for life. So what are the lessons from your classroom that you want them to take with them and remember forever? And hopefully that's not going to be pantyhose and, you know, a sweater and a nice jacket. Those are good words. But that's not an enduring understanding. This is good cultural stuff, like, you know, keeping history from repeating itself and whatever. Important to know and do. Okay, so now here's where we get into some key things. In the enduring understandings, I want them to know how they go somewhere, what they have, what they need, what they want, who they are, you know, Sarah and a star. There's some very concrete verbs I want them to know forever. So we start in level 1 with those. Important to know and do. Actually, have you ever heard of Terry Waltz's Super 7 verbs? Goes and so that's like the enduring understanding. Those Super 7, if you haven't heard of them, just Google Super 7 verbs, Terry Waltz, and you'll come up with these verbs. Those are the enduring understanding. If they know those basic things, they can get around anywhere they go using their language. Important to know and do. There's also a chart called the Sweet 16 by Mike Pito. And Mike says, well, you know, those are good to know, but being able to say, like, I like and I see, and those are also important. And I agree. Those are important to know and be able to do them. And using present, past, and future times effectively. Worth being familiar with. Okay, now this is some vocabulary. What is worth? They might need to buy a pair of pants when they get to Spain. Oh, I ripped my pants. I got to get a new pair. So those are vocabulary words that are important to know. Walking and running and eating and different kinds of foods that they might eat. Those are worth being familiar with. Over here is my addition to what Wiggins and McTighe have told us is important. I added in the chuck it bucket, and I want you to use it judiciously. Go through your vocab list before you hand it out to students. If you're tied to a list, and even if you're not, if you're looking at a novel, let's say you're planning all your units from a novel, and you're reading through this first chapter, and you're like, oh, this is Hija del Sastre from Spain. it says right here that she's a seamstress. I better drill them on this word to make sure. What difference does it make if they know seamstress? Just tell them every time you read it. In the theme of the book, she's a seamstress. But overall, if they don't remember seamstress, that's not going to hurt them ever. So don't make that a chuck it bucket. Like, that's a throwaway word. Now, when she's looking for, or when he's lying to her, those are good quality vocab words that you want to focus on. So take your list and go down the line. Clothing vocabulary, there's 60 words on that list. Do they need to know all of them? No, nobody wears pantyhose. I guess they're kind of coming back. But most of the time, that's total. Say jacket instead of coat. Like, teach them some things that are easier and will get the point across, or a sweater, whatever. They could still say what they needed, and they'll pick it up if they ever need it. I always find that verbs are kind of a key thing for us to really work on in class, in our stories, because vocab, if you look on your little app, you can get a vocab word really quickly, but if you try to Google a verb, you get all kinds of weird, like, conjugations and stuff. So chuck it bucket is for any words that you just think, this is nonsense. I don't know why this is on the list. And once you use that and you start taking out, I threw some whole chapters in there. I threw the backpack chapter in. I threw the chores chapter in. Didn't need those. After the food chapter in Realidades, there was a chapter of kind of like extra vegetables and knife and fork and spoon. And those were things that I thought, if you lose your fork at a restaurant, you can go, necesito. I would rather make room to teach something else in this spot. I'm chucking this whole thing. Or, I can teach it to him in a story or something. So chuck it bucket, just anything that you think you can pare away, because every step that you pare something down from that curriculum, then you're able to add something new later. So these are those super verbs. And again, you don't have to type your little fingers off copying them down. You can either shoot a picture of it, or you can just Google Super 7 and the Sweet 16. It'll give you these main verbs. These are kind of my focus. I start with the Super 7 at level 1, and I reuse those in present, past, and future tense through level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just like consistently reviewing them in all the stories that we do. And the Sweet 16 we add slowly through level 1. By the end of level 1, they will have seen all of them at some point. But these are pretty much the right off the bat. And then we read at the end of first quarter, the last week of first quarter, we read Brandon Brown Wants a Dog, because these are the verbs that make up the whole book of Brandon Brown Wants a Dog. So you're all ready to go with those. What are some of your goals? Have you thought about it with your language students? I had never thought about it. I was a teacher and I was doing a job, and I hadn't thought about what my goals were. So today my goals are a little different. I find that in the past, I was right here on my goals. Remembering and understanding. I wanted them to remember all the verbs from the list, and I wanted them to understand the grammar concepts. So Bloom's taxonomy-wise, our language was very low level. Today, I'm asking them, okay, we're talking about identity. I want you to create a mural that represents your identity, and then explain to me who all the people are that have influenced you to make you into the person that you are. My old kids could never have done that. They would have just given me back the list of words. So try to think of goals in terms of moving up this Bloom's taxonomy into evaluating and creating and analyzing and applying what they know. So here's some good goal starters. As you're looking to start planning units, if you can go back and plan just one unit with a backward design kind of a style, these would be great descriptors for admin and whoever else. Students will understand. What kinds of things do you want them to understand when they leave your room? Students will be able to use target language in an increasingly complex manner to do what? That was lacking in my old classroom. They stuck with quiere throughout 4 years. Everything was always wants or needs or those low-level verb structures, and now I'm trying to give them synonyms. Instead of says, why don't we do shouts or exclaims or, all kinds of just synonyms for the same thing that make them a broader language. Students will be able to narrate in, I didn't know, you guys, that an advanced low speaker, a college graduate with study abroad, only successfully uses present, past, and future with mistakes, comprehensible to a native speaker, any native speaker. I was expecting that in 2 or 3 years with my students, and it's just not possible. So give them time and focus on pouring language into them so that those things will come out of them. So we identify our desired results. What is the end of your unit? What do you want out of your students? And I told you I used to want them to put verbs into spaces in a verb chart or fill in blanks in a sentence, and I wanted them to be able to list off the vocabulary, spell it right, and get the accents right. But that was very low-level thinking. Now I'm going to ask them to do things that are a lot more complex. So after I've identified my result, I have to create the assessment. Plan those assessments before you even start to teach, because it helps you to pick out all the different pieces of this unit that you're going to create. If you know what the assessment is, I told you one of mine is this mural that tells me who they are and who has influenced them. So what do I have to do? First, I have to teach them a little about murals. Like, what does a mural look like? It's not what they automatically think is that they just put like 5 different separate images on a piece of paper and that's a mural. But it has to like flow together. And then we have to talk a little bit about symbolism. And how do you symbolize without just blatantly saying this apple means I like to eat apples. And then I have to teach them about how to say things like I'm influenced by, my parents taught me this, or I learned this from so-and-so, and I consider myself. So you have to build all of this unit around that. You really have to think as you're planning the assessment, what does that mean to you? Because there was a time when assessment to me meant like a fill in the blank or a multiple choice kind of thing. But now assessment looks more like some kind of a speaking, some kind of a reading, some kind of a writing, some kind of a listening. I'm trying to do a lot more interpersonal because in all honesty, I used to do a ton of presentational speaking. But after you leave high school and college, when do you ever present to anyone in your target language? What do you use target language to do? Communicate. And so I wasn't preparing them for that very well. So I've been trying to come up with ways that I can do these assessments and throw in that interpersonal part. So when they present their murals, they're presenting to friends who then have to ask them questions about what they've seen and heard, and they have to respond back. Evaluate, please, prior to that summative assessment. This is where I was going wrong with all those failed crops. I would just be plowing through a chapter, and I would give them the vocabulary quiz, and Andy would do terrible, and Hannah would do great, and I would say, oh, well, it's because Andy's just not interested in Spanish, and I would just keep moving on. And then I would get to the end, and he would do terrible on that test. I never changed anything in the in-between to make it easier for him or to address the fact that he, and apparently like 25% of the class, were not understanding what I was teaching them. So evaluate, but use that evaluation then to lead where you're going to go with the lesson before you get to your summative assessment. You don't want to come to that point and have them be not ready for it. And then stage 3, which is my favorite, is you got to gather your resources for your unit. Pinterest. How many of you are already there? It's like a sickness. Once you get on Pinterest, it's like a monkey on your back. You keep getting on there and going, oh, I can use that. I've found tons of great stuff on that site. It's the best thing. Some of you I know will remember Realia. Back in the day, youngsters, back in the day before Google, there wasn't such a thing as the internet, and you couldn't just get stuff to use in your classroom by ordering it on Amazon. You had to go to another country, or somebody you knew had to go to another country and bring it back. And Teachers Discovery sold this packet of things from like soup labels and little boxes of stuff from other countries, and it was called Realia. Luckily, we don't have to do that anymore because that was all kind of lame stuff anyway. Now we can go online and we can get actual real stuff. One of the coolest things I've found lately, there's a song for Spanish teachers, Despacito, not appropriate for Spanish class at all. But the kids are totally listening to it. After you've introduced them to music, those little cretins go home and do homework. They go listen to other Spanish songs. It's a trap. I've never given a homework that they would take home and actually do. Like they either copy it outside in the hallway or they, fill it in as we go along. So I stopped giving homework and I started giving them music. And then they were like, oh, I listened to 7 songs last night. I'm like, oh, I told you not to watch that video when you went home. I said, it will. Don't you watch that. So Despacito. Now that it's come out with Justin Bieber on the radio, big stuff, they're like, oh, I love this song. I said, have you ever seen this interview? There's this great interview with Nicky Jam and J Balvin, and they're making so much fun of Justin Bieber for his Spanish in that video. And bless Justin's heart. I mean, he was trying, I guess. So, you can see it's a great argument. You don't have to show them the song. They already know the song. But that's a good little resource that you can find. That's Realia. It's right up their alley because these are 2 people. We've definitely heard Nicky Jam and we've definitely heard J Balvin. And now they're seeing them joke about Justin Bieber and his Spanish. And so it's really great material to bring in class. So we can use that as do you think that's okay, so to become an advanced level speaker, you have to be able to give and defend an opinion. And I do that all the time with just little quick things like this. It might be a one-day thing that we do in class. Do you think that they should make fun of Justin Bieber's Spanish? Or do you think that they should be respectful because he's trying to speak Spanish? Then you get kids on both sides because they've never thought about it. They just thought it was funny that Justin Bieber, was singing in funny Spanish. But then they start to go, oh, yeah, they shouldn't make fun of him. He's trying. So gather your resources. So here's just kind of a template that I set up. I always think of what's my content, my vocabulary, my topic. What have I found on the internet? I found a video of Nicky Jam and J Balvin making fun of Justin Bieber. So there's my content for the day. So what am I going to do with this? What vocabulary can I use? Well, make fun of. Should they accept him? Should they be understanding? So I can come up with some really good structures that I could use. What technology can I bring in? What hooks can I bring in? I might bring in a hook of somebody that's speaking broken English and say, what do you think? Are they really trying hard to speak English? Let them see from the opposite side. So just give them some kind of a hook into the unit. Authentic resources. I'm not going to give them the whole song Despacito because it's suggestive. But so catchy. Dang it, it's so catchy. Awesome. I didn't get to click the link, but I think I saw that's the kind of hook, bring in that or as an authentic resource, like these remakes of things. Are there any novels that go along with whatever your content or topic area, just like a way to sort out your thoughts when you sit down to plan a unit? I like to scribble notes all around stuff while I'm looking for my resources that will go along with whatever the assessment that I've thought of is.
Going back to the Despacito,
that's fine.
There was a thing I just saw on my Facebook feed where they do a parody of it, and there's several parodies of it, but this one is elotito, like the elote, and it shows him in love, the man in love with
his elote. Oh, love. So good. And add lots of engaging stories. And I've found that stories don't have to be super silly. When I first started doing TPRS, CI kinds of stuff, I thought everything had to have like 17 elephants getting in a car and going to Jamaica or Djibouti, Africa. The kids love Djibouti. He's in Djibouti. But it's not necessarily going to have to be silly. That story about Jennings going to the rainforest had silly moments, but mostly it was Jennings being a tourist. He had his camera, he was taking pictures, he was seeing all the different features of the rainforest, and then something kind of crazy would happen, like a snake. He wanted to get a selfie with an anaconda, and I had a video of my tour guide friend showing them an anaconda, so I knew I needed to get anacondas in there. Like I said, Tarzan swept in and saved him from the anaconda. So there were some silly things, but the main point of that story was like to build some culture before we did a unit. Incorporate culture through novels. Let's say you are going to pull out a textbook unit and put in a novel unit. Or you've been doing storytelling, or maybe you've been on the fence about doing novels. I'm going to show you at the end of session 3 of our 3-part session, I'm going to show you some of our results with our reading program. Currently, we do 4 novels in level 1, 4 novels in level 2, 3 novels in level 3, plus an authentic resource from Scholastic. They have a series called Explora tu Mundo, Explore Your World, and that book is all sciencey stuff. It's the Selva Tropical, so as we're doing our rainforest unit, we read out of that instead of a novel. And then in Spanish 4, we do 3 novels, and then we do some authentic literature pieces while we're in there. If you incorporate your culture through novels, you're going to see gains. We have seen gains not just in reading. Our scores on writing and speaking have shot through the roof because when you're doing a novel, you're discussing and you're writing about it and you're getting to know characters and you're analyzing and creating. And all of a sudden, they're having these big, deep thoughts that are making them more proficient speakers. So our scores are just going through the roof with our incorporating more reading and more free reading. So music, film, art, games. Make sure if you're incorporating games that they're games with a good purpose. There are a lot of games that I used to play, like Verb Battleship, that were more of a waste of class time, I think, now, because it was spoken in English. And so now we're doing games like Slap. And in Slap, I'll make, we've done a movie talk or we've just finished telling a story, and I have a bunch of pictures that we lay on Trevor's desk. And each group has 2 students, and they each have a little feather, or they can use their hand, but they'll probably hurt each other if they use their hand. So we do feathers, and I'll describe one of the pictures to them, and they'll have to poke the picture. After we've done that a couple rounds and they've heard me describing the pictures, then I can have another student come up and start describing the pictures, and I can take their space. You're going to pick your best ones, obviously, to do the description. They're the only ones that are going to be brave enough. But then you're getting them thinking and speaking and listening to each other too, and they totally understand each other's inner language. Sometimes I'm thinking, what did she just say? And all the kids are like, oh yeah, because they totally get it. So games with a purpose. I have a huge reading library, and this is where I get some of my ideas for my units. Find ways to get funding. We have an academic foundation at school. I wrote for a grant this year. They gave me $1,000 to buy readers for my classroom. So we have all these Scholastic Explora tu Mundo books are fabulous because there's tons of cognates, and it's stuff that when kids are sitting down with some free time to read, they're able to do that. If you're looking for a way to just maybe 5 or 10 minutes of bringing in some good CI. Buy some books like this, and then at the beginning of your class period, give them just a little time to start out with some reading. Do we do 50 minutes and then 10-minute break, or is it an hour and then 10-minute break? I wanted to make sure that, like, if they wanted to go to another session. 40 is one. Okay, that's what I thought, but I didn't want to keep them in case they were. So this is a great way to get some good CI. There's tons of cognates. And what you'll notice, the more time you give them to read a little bit, they'll be writing along on something else. And like the kids that have read this ancient Egypt book will talk about like a pyramid or the sand. And this word will pop up and I'm like, where did you learn that? And they're, oh, that ancient Egypt book. I was reading that. That was really cool. Oops, yep.
The books that you have, are they all like just totally in Spanish?
Yes.
Okay, because I've been going through my books and filing away and getting rid of them.
In level 1, I leave those ones with both out because I think that's good for those level 1 students in a reading period for them for the whole first year. They don't have enough vocab under them to read very many books. So having that bilingual, you will see them like looking back and forth between the two, not necessarily reading the Spanish first and then checking themselves, but like looking at it and back and forth, comparing a little bit. And they'll ask you questions when they're looking at those like, why does this say house big? You know, so they're making some little connections on their own as they read through those. So I think there's value in all those kinds of books. So after you have gotten through finding your resources, identifying your results, making your assessment, then you're going to want to plan your instruction. So you take your theme and make sure all of the activities are going to lead toward that theme. What are your resources? What skills will you develop in this theme? And what vocabulary and structures will students need to communicate? And what will proficiency look like? So here's where you can take a traditional textbook chapter, a novel unit, a unit that you're creating on your own. On Twitter, about 4 years ago, a girl named Crystal Barragan from Texas posted a unit that she had done about botas picudas in Mexico, the pointy boots. And in her unit, she thought of the overarching theme of, is there a connection between music and fashion? So you're getting all of your clothing vocabulary, but you're wrapping it inside of a cultural context. So now you have music, because you're going to share with them Tribal Monterrey, yeah, good songs. That was really popular at the time. And you ask them, do you think so? In your opinion, because we're starting with level 1, we've got to know if they have an opinion or not. In your opinion, is there a connection between music and fashion? And the first instinct is to say, no, not really. But then you pop up a couple pictures of country music singers in their Wranglers, and they're like, oh. Or, you know, the heavy metal groups and all their leather and stuff. And then you show them the pointy boots, and they're like, whoa. So it's kind of a way to get them involved. You're still doing the same basic material that your school or, you know, maybe parents, everybody has different pressures on them. I'm lucky. My administration said, do what you want. You have our blessing, do what you want. But that's not the case everywhere. So whatever the pressures you have, try to wrap cultural around that situation that you're trapped in. And decide what proficiency will look like. It's a different goal at every level. You remember we talked about novice lows can only use isolated words. Hopefully our students in comprehensible input classrooms will only be using one-word answers for a short time. And then they'll move on to chunks. Yes, tiene un hermano. That, guys, I know it sounds like a sentence, but it's not. It's really like a memorized chunk that they've acquired now. A sentence sounds more like taking that and adding details to it. Tiene un hermano con, she has a brother with long blonde hair. Okay, now they've made a sentence, and that's more like a novice high. So at that novice level, if you're doing this unit 9 weeks in, they're basically only going to be able to tell you, yes, country singers wear jeans. Yes, the pointy boots are long. They're novices. But if you do that same unit in a level 4, You can talk about a lot deeper stuff. Why do you think that, in your opinion, why do they wear the pointy boots? Is it because they're easy to dance in? No. So it's a trend, it's a style. So what is proficiency going to look like? And try and make it realistic. If our Spanish 4s nationally are graduating on that novice high, intermediate, low border, conversation's probably not going to look super, super elaborate in Spanish 1. So I'm going to let you take your 10-minute break. If you want to stay in the next segment, we're going to look at a unit or two planned with backward design. So we'll start with like the hook of the unit. We'll go through assessment and all of the pieces that lead up to it and where you can find those resources. And then the end session, the third part, is just going to be about the kind of results that we've been seeing from these units. And then some help planning, like what are some ideas, like the clothing unit, how are we going to take these traditional themes and topics and wrap them up in culture. So hope to see you back. But I totally understand there's a lot of good offerings out there. Get a drink. I need to get a drink. I need to go get a water. Go get a water and dine.